In our lab, we learned the importance of the fast Fourier transform method as a tool in order to determine the experimental frequency response of a system by running only one test. However, before we were able to run our test, we had to create a calibration equation for a flexible beam. After doing this, we attached our beam to the Quanzo servo motor plant and ran two tests. One sinusoidal forcing test, where we were given the frequencies, and one random forcing test, where they were randomly generated. We then used our data for the fast Fourier transform method to model our system and create a transfer function which modeled it. We also plotted our experimental data for our fast Fourier transform equation for both the sinusoidal and random tests in order to determine how well they represented our system. We found that the FFT for the sinusoidal forcing test, where we were given specific frequencies, produced a sharper and more precise curve, which was more accurate for lower frequencies. However, only one frequency response was able to be modeled at a time. For our random forcing test, we found that our graph for the FFT had a smoother curve due to the larger amount of input frequency responses. However, it was not as accurate in predicting the system response as our sinusoidal forcing tests.
When our group arrived at lab, the setup shown in the top left was already assembled for us. The setup included a Quanzo servo motor, a Quanzo linear voltage motor, a servo motor plant, a data acquisition board, and a flexible beam. The tip of the beam was positioned in the center of the comb shown on the right. The provided Simulink program was opened on a lab computer. The amplitude was set to 0 and the simulation time was set to 200 seconds. The program was then run and the comb was moved to each of the positions listed on the table: -2 inches, -1 inches, the center of the comb, 1 inch, and 2 inches. After the test, the strain gauge voltages were estimated for each beam position using the plot developed by Simulink. The delta values were plotted versus the strain gauge voltages, and a line of best fit was developed for the graph. The slope of this line of best fit was entered as the new gain in the Simulink program. 6 tests were then run for each of the frequencies and amplitude values shown in the table below. After each test, the motor angle and beam deflection data was saved as MATLAB files. The manual switch was then switched to the random test block and 6 random tests were run. After, the motor angle and beam deflection data was again saved for each test.
The figure on the right is a plot of motor angle and tip deflection versus time. For this plot, we are able to determine the amplitude ratio and the phase angle. The figure on the left shows a plot of the magnitude and phase angle results from the fast Fourier transform compared with the estimated transfer function. The significance of this is that a transfer function can be used to be fitted to a set of data to predict its behavior.